In the gleaming suburbs where every blade of grass seemed to bow to invisible rules, I believed I had escaped the chaos of city life for good. 2 years earlier, I had poured my life savings into this upscale HOA community, chasing the dream of peaceful mornings on a pristine lawn, friendly waves from neighbors, and the kind of stability that came with strict covenants and monthly dues. The association promised perfection, trimmed hedges, spotless common areas, and swift enforcement against anything that might lower property values. I signed the paperwork without hesitation, convinced that the rules would protect me rather than punish me. My modern two-story home sat proudly on a corner lot, its fresh paint and carefully landscaped garden the envy of the block. Life felt settled, until that fateful Tuesday afternoon when everything shattered. I pulled into my driveway after a grueling workday, the golden sunlight casting long shadows across what should have been my immaculate front yard. Instead, horror gripped me as I stepped out of the car. My once perfect lawn was buried beneath a disgusting avalanche of trash. Dozens of black plastic bags split open, spilling construction debris, crumpled fast food wrappers, shattered tiles, rusty nails, old paint cans, and foul-smelling yard waste that looked like it had been scraped from some recent HOA maintenance project. The mess stretched from the property line all the way to my front porch steps, turning my green oasis into a reeking landfill. The stench assaulted my senses immediately, and rage surged through my veins like fire. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Someone had chosen to dump their garbage directly onto my private property, as if it were nothing more than an extension of their dumpster. My mind raced back to the complaints I had filed over the past months. Polite letters pointing out the association's selective enforcement, their blind eye to certain neighbors' violations, while hammering me over minor details like the exact shade of my mailbox. Now it felt like payback, a silent warning to stop questioning their authority. I stood frozen on my driveway, fists clenched, staring at the destruction of everything I had worked so hard to build. The mortgage, the weekends spent planting flowers, the dreams of barbecues and family gatherings, all mocked by this mountain of refuse. No more. I refused to play the victim. Instead of dialing their office like a compliant homeowner, I made a decision that would change everything. I would gather every single piece of this trash, load it into my truck, and deliver it straight back to the person truly responsible, the HOA president himself at his own lavish doorstep. If they thought they could treat residents this way without consequences, they were about to face a reckoning they would never forget. The quiet suburban street had no idea what storm was about to hit.
Chapter 1. The weight of that trash pile pressed on my chest long after the sun had set that Tuesday. I spent the entire evening under harsh floodlights, gloves on, methodically photographing every angle of the destruction before touching anything. The flash of my camera captured the broken tiles glinting like accusations, the paint cans leaking onto my grass, the unmistakable HOA maintenance stickers still attached to several backs. My mind replayed every polite email I had sent over the past year. Every time the association had dismissed my concerns with form letters and veiled threats of fines. This wasn't random vandalism, it was targeted. The community I had trusted to protect my investment had instead chosen to punish me for speaking up. Sleep evaded me that night as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the faint stench still lingering in my nostrils despite the closed windows. By dawn, I was already outside again, the cool morning air doing nothing to calm the storm building inside me. I reviewed the neighborhood covenants I had signed so eagerly 2 years earlier, page after page of rules designed to maintain harmony, yet here I was, the victim of the very system meant to safeguard us all. The association president, Mr. Richard Hargrove, lived in the largest estate at the far end of the community, a sprawling mansion that somehow escaped the same scrutiny the rest of us faced. His own yard featured fountains and perfectly trimmed topiaries, while the rest of us scrambled to meet impossible standards. I had seen him at board meetings, always smiling that polished smile while enforcing fines on everyone else. Now the pieces fit together. My complaints about uneven enforcement had clearly reached the wrong ears, and this trash dump was the response. The realization fueled a cold determination rather than helpless anger. I would not beg for cleanup. I would not pay their ridiculous fines. I would return their mess with interest. Throughout the morning, I worked methodically, documenting every detail with timestamps and measurements. Neighbors drove past slowly, some offering sympathetic glances, others averting their eyes as if afraid to get involved. The isolation only strengthened my resolve. By midday, the lawn was still a disaster, but my evidence folder on my laptop grew thicker with photos, videos, and copies of every prior communication. The HOA had crossed a line they could never uncross. As I stood at the edge of my property, staring at the boundary where the trash had been so carelessly heaved over, I knew this moment marked the beginning of something far larger than a simple cleanup. The HOA had declared war on the wrong homeowner, and I was ready to fight back with everything I had. The quiet suburban afternoon held its breath, unaware that the real confrontation was only hours away and would soon escalate beyond anything the board could control.
Chapter 2. By the time the HOA inspection notice arrived via certified mail the next morning, my truck was already half loaded with carefully bagged and labeled trash. I had spent the previous night sealing every piece of evidence in heavy-duty contractor bags, each one tagged with the exact location it had been found on my property. The official letter demanded I remove the unauthorized debris within 48 hours or face escalating daily fines starting at $500. The sheer audacity of it nearly made me laugh through my rage. They had dumped it here, and now they expected me to dispose of it at my own expense while pretending innocence. I set the letter aside and continued my preparations, my hands steady despite the fury simmering beneath the surface. The inspection team arrived precisely at 10 o'clock. 2 representatives in matching polo shirts emblazoned with the HOA logo, clipboards in hand and sunglasses hiding their eyes. They parked their spotless association vehicle right at my curb and began their slow walk across the lawn, deliberately stepping around the worst of the mess as if it had appeared by magic. I watched from my porch, arms crossed, every detail of their body language confirming what I already knew. They measured distances, took their own photos, and muttered notes to each other while completely ignoring the obvious trail of debris leading from the community maintenance shed just beyond my back fence. When they finally approached me, their expressions were a practiced mix of professional concern and subtle accusation. The lead inspector gestured toward the trash and began explaining association policy in that condescending tone reserved for rule breakers. I listened without interruption as they listed the violations I had supposedly committed by allowing the debris to remain. Each word only solidified my plan. They claimed the trash must have blown in from a neighboring construction site, despite the complete absence of wind and the clear maintenance tags still visible on multiple bags. My property, once a source of pride, now felt like enemy territory under occupation. I stood my ground, refusing to engage in their scripted narrative, my silence speaking volumes as they continued their inspection. The sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the scattered debris, and the contrast between their polished appearance and the chaos they refused to acknowledge only heightened the injustice of the moment. By the time they finished their notes and handed me yet another warning notice, my decision had hardened into absolute certainty. This inspection wasn't about resolution, it was about intimidation. They had no idea that their visit had just given me the final motivation I needed to execute my plan with surgical precision. The truck sat waiting in the garage, loaded and ready, and the HOA President's address was already programmed into my GPS. The game had shifted, and I held every card.
Chapter 3. The days that followed the inspection blurred into a calculated campaign of documentation and preparation. I reviewed security footage from my cameras installed the previous year, catching the exact moment the maintenance crew had backed their truck up to my fence under cover of early morning darkness. The low-resolution night vision still clearly showed the distinctive HOA logo on the vehicle and the deliberate tossing of bags over the boundary. This wasn't an accident or wind-blown debris. It was a coordinated act. Armed with this new evidence, I spent hours compiling a comprehensive digital dossier. Photos, videos, timestamps, maintenance logs I had obtained through public records requests, and every piece of correspondence dating back 18 months. The folder grew into a weapon, meticulously organized and backed up in multiple locations. Meanwhile, the association continued its pressure campaign. Daily emails arrived demanding immediate cleanup, each one more threatening than the last. Fines began accruing on paper, and a certified letter warned of potential lien on my property if I failed to comply. The psychological warfare was textbook, designed to break residents into submission before they could organize any resistance. Yet every new threat only reinforced my determination. I refused to touch a single bag. Instead, I focused on the next phase of my plan, transferring every piece of trash from my lawn into the bed of my heavy-duty pickup truck. The work was backbreaking and foul-smelling, but each bag I lifted felt like reclaiming a piece of my dignity. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, some whispering among themselves, but no one dared approach. The community's fear of the HOA was palpable, yet it only isolated the association further in my mind. By the end of the week, my lawn finally breathed again beneath the grass, but the truck now sat heavy with evidence. I had documented the entire loading process with additional video, narrating each step for the record. The weight of the truck mirrored the weight of injustice I carried, yet it also represented power. The HOA President's mansion loomed large in my thoughts, a sprawling estate with gated entry and perfectly maintained grounds that somehow never faced the same scrutiny. I pictured his reaction when I arrived unannounced at his private residence, far from the boardroom where he wielded power so casually. The drive would take less than 20 minutes, but it would represent the longest journey I had taken since moving here. As I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key, the engine rumbling to life beneath me, I felt a surge of clarity. This wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was justice delivered directly to the source. The suburban streets rolled past my windows as I pulled out, the loaded truck a silent declaration of war. The association had started this conflict, but I was about to finish it on my terms.
Chapter 4. The drive through the winding streets of the community felt surreal, the truck's suspension protesting under the weight of returned justice. Every whump reminded me of the hours spent loading, the careful labeling, the irrefutable proof secured in the glove compartment. I passed familiar homes where residents had once nodded politely at neighborhood events, now silent witnesses to a battle they preferred to ignore. The HOA President's address led me past the gated entrance reserved for the elite section of the community, where mansions sat on larger lots with private pools and guest houses. Security cameras tracked my progress, but I drove with deliberate calm, refusing to speed or show any sign of hesitation. The mansion came into view exactly as I had imagined: grand columns, perfectly manicured landscaping, and an expansive circular driveway that could easily accommodate several vehicles. I pulled directly onto the property, parking the truck prominently in front of the main entrance where it could not be ignored. The engine died with a final rumble, and the sudden silence amplified the gravity of the moment. Before I could even step out, the front door opened and Richard Hargrove himself emerged, dressed in weekend casual attire that did nothing to diminish his aura of authority. His expression shifted rapidly from confusion to recognition to outright fury as he registered the truck and its cargo. He strode down the steps, gesturing wildly toward the vehicle, clearly demanding an explanation without uttering a word I needed to hear. I met his gaze steadily, my own posture radiating the same unyielding resolve I had maintained throughout this ordeal. The argument unfolded exactly as the evidence had predicted. He pointed accusingly at the truck, then at me, his face reddening with each passing second. I simply gestured toward the labeled bags, then toward the security camera footage playing on my phone screen held up for him to see. His denials grew more frantic, but the proof was undeniable. Maintenance crew members began appearing from the side of the house, clearly summoned by some silent alert, yet they hesitated at the edge of the driveway as if unsure whose orders to follow. The entire scene played out under the watchful eyes of the mansion's security system, every gesture and expression now permanently recorded from multiple angles. Neighbors from surrounding estates peered through windows and over hedges, drawn by the unprecedented spectacle on the president's own property. The power dynamic had inverted completely. For the first time, the man who had enforced rules so ruthlessly found himself on the receiving end of accountability. The confrontation stretched on as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the pristine driveway, now marred by the presence of the very trash he had ordered dumped on my lawn. This moment represented the turning point I had fought so hard to reach, and the outcome would reverberate through the entire association.
Chapter 5. The confrontation on Richard Hargrove's driveway stretched into the golden hour, the dramatic lighting only intensifying the visual drama unfolding before the growing audience of onlookers. Security personnel hovered at a respectful distance, clearly torn between protecting their employer and avoiding involvement in what had become a very public spectacle. Hargrove's gestures grew more exaggerated as he realized the full extent of the evidence I had brought with me. The labeled bags, the timestamps, the video footage, and the maintenance logs all painted an irrefutable picture that no amount of bluster could erase. I remained calm and methodical, presenting each piece of proof in sequence while maintaining my position beside the truck. The contrast between his luxurious estate and the garbage now occupying his pristine driveway created a visual statement more powerful than any words could convey. Word of the incident spread rapidly through the community via group chats and frantic phone calls. Within minutes, several board members arrived, their vehicles screeching to hasty stops along the street. They joined the argument with their own attempts at damage control, but the evidence overwhelmed every defense they offered. I had anticipated their arrival and had prepared additional copies of the dossier, handing them out with deliberate professionalism. The president's face shifted from anger to visible concern as he recognized the potential legal and reputational damage. The association's carefully cultivated image of fairness and professionalism was crumbling in real time on his own property. Cameras from multiple neighbors captured the entire exchange, ensuring that this moment would not be easily swept under the rug or dismissed as a misunderstanding. As the confrontation reached its peak, I made one final gesture, unloading the first bag directly onto the driveway in full view of everyone present. The symbolic act sent a clear message that echoed louder than any verbal exchange could convey. Hargrove's attempts to stop me were futile against the weight of public scrutiny and recorded evidence. Board members exchanged uneasy glances, realizing the situation had spiraled far beyond their control. The sun dipped lower, bathing the scene in rich amber light that highlighted every detail of the standoff. This was no longer a private dispute between one homeowner and the association. It had become a public reckoning that exposed years of unchecked power. The satisfaction I felt in that moment was profound, not from malice, but from the knowledge that justice had finally been served at the highest level. The HOA had thrown trash on my property, and I had delivered it straight to their boss with undeniable proof. The repercussions would unfold in the coming days, but the victory was already mine.
Chapter 6. The days following the driveway confrontation unfolded with the precision of a well-executed plan reaching its conclusion. News of the incident spread like wildfire through the community and beyond, local news outlets picking up the story after several viral videos surfaced online. The HOA board called an emergency meeting that I attended with my full dossier in hand, presenting the evidence to the entire membership rather than just the leadership. The room fell into stunned silence as video after video played, showing the deliberate dumping, the inspection denial, and finally the return delivery to the president's own home. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while residents who had suffered similar silent injustices began voicing their own experiences. The power structure that had seemed impenetrable began showing visible cracks under the weight of collective outrage and undeniable proof. Legal counsel for the association attempted to contain the damage through private negotiations, but I refused any settlement that did not include full public acknowledgement, reimbursement for all expenses, and a complete overhaul of enforcement policies. The lien threats vanished overnight, replaced by formal apologies and promises of reform. Richard Hargrove resigned his position as president within the week, citing personal reasons that fooled no one. New leadership was elected with a mandate for transparency and fairness, and the association implemented new oversight measures to prevent future abuses of power. My property was restored to pristine condition at their expense, complete with professional landscaping upgrades as compensation for the stress and damage. The victory extended far beyond my own lawn. Other homeowners who had lived in fear of selective enforcement began stepping forward, sharing their stories and pushing for even greater changes. The community that had once felt oppressive now buzzed with a renewed sense of empowerment and accountability. I sat on my restored porch one quiet evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in the same golden hues that had witnessed the confrontation. The truck stood clean in the driveway, no longer carrying the weight of injustice, but instead representing the strength of one homeowner who refused to accept unfair treatment.
The HOA had thrown trash on my property, and I had taken it back to their boss with consequences they would never forget. The suburban paradise I had originally sought had finally been restored, not through blind compliance, but through courage and determination. The story served as a powerful reminder to every resident. When the system fails, sometimes the most effective response is to deliver the problem directly to those responsible. Justice, when served with evidence and resolve, always finds its way home.